Hello and welcome to Unwind Sessions, where right after my shift, I give the highlights of my workday and answer any questions that might have been asked at the previous session. My name is Juan. I am an English, Spanish, medical video remote interpreter with over 4 years of experience. Today is Tuesday, April 27, 2021. It was a very interesting day today, in contrast to the past 2 days where nothing really relevant or nothing really exciting happened. Today I took a total of 28 calls and I did have three sessions that I would like to talk about today. The first session being it was a session with a dietitian, and it was the parents of a child that had diabetes. So as soon as the session came in, the provider let me know that it was only the parents that needed the interpretation and that not the patient because the patient actually spoke English. So which I thanked her for letting me know that, and we just dove right into the session. And I don't really like to ask how the the provider wants me to handle the session, what I'll be interpreting or anything, because I find it better that if you just go with the flow, and because no two persons are going to be alike, and no two sessions are going to be the same. So sometimes the provider wants everything interpreted, sometimes only for the parents, only what is asked directly to the parents, and sometimes you just don't know. I mean, it's just gonna be wild. And sometimes when you ask the provider something, and then you try to do it as they say, and it turns out that it's just killing the flow of the session. So what I like to do is to actually just dive right into it and just see what I'm going to do right there and then. Just jump into the deep end, right? So the way that this session went was the following. The provider asked the patient a question, and if I knew that the question was directed only to the daughter, then I would not interpret that, and the patient, I'm sorry, and the patient would answer in English, and nothing of what the patient said in English was interpreted to the parents in Spanish. Um, Now, when the provider asked a question that I knew that the parents were going to be asked the same question, then I would interpret that question before the patient answered. And the session went pretty well like that, and I had no objections from the parents, from the daughter, from the doctor, and everything went very well. However, there are some times when the provider will ask you to interpret everything, even what the patient answers. It was not what happened this time, and that is why I don't really like to ask, because sometimes they have you interpret the whole session, and then they just forget about that you're interpreting, and they just go and they just have a whole conversation, and then you're left not knowing what to interpret because it's just a whole conversation and they ask you wacky things. So I always like to go with the flow, and if it gets asked of me, then I will do it. If it doesn't get asked, I won't. Just keeping the flow of the session, just maintaining a good communication between everyone and making sure that everyone is happy the way that the session is going. And this time it did go pretty well. There were no objections, like I stated, and the parents were able to get heard, and the daughter was able to answer in a swift manner that did not need interpreting. And everything that the doctor said that I believe the parents needed to hear, I let them know, and there was not a single time when the provider told me, "Could you please interpret this for the parents?" So I think I did a very good job in handling this session. But you are going to, um, it is going to be up to you. You are going to be the one that is going to need to take the decision and actually how to handle this type of sessions. So you will have to use your judgment and cues that the providers and everyone in the session gives you. So just do your best. And another thing that I'm going to mention is that today I had a patient that um, was getting discharged, and then the nurse um, told us that if we could wait because she had to go speak to another provider, and she left us there. And when she left, the lady started talking to me like if I was a nurse. She started asking me questions, and I politely told her that I was just an interpreter and she needed to wait for the nurse because I was just the interpreter and that is all that I could help her with. And the lady said, okay, that is not a problem, and I know that. But then she kept on telling me her story. And then I told her, ma'am, I think it's best if we wait for the nurse. And then she said, yeah, but I'm just telling you my story right now. That way you already know. And then I told her, oh, okay, well then, thank you very much for that, and I will gladly listen to your story. That way, when the nurse comes back, I'll already have an idea of what you want to say. And then she said, you know what? On second thought, can you please just write down everything that I'm telling you? That way you can interpret for the nurse once she comes back. And that way I don't have to tell her again. So I let her know that I could not do that. I told her I could not do that because number one, I did not know how long the lady was going to, the nurse was going to take to come back. And if she actually told me her whole story, once the nurse came back, um, I was going to remember some things and I didn't want to miss any important information. So I told her if she could give me the story right now, but I would not be writing anything down or taking down any notes. I would just listen to what she had to say. And after the nurse came in, I would ask the lady to actually the patient to go ahead and ask anything that she wanted to tell the nurse, and I would gladly go ahead and interpret for her. And the lady agreed and she said okay, and she told me her story. And then when her story was done, she said, okay, I think we should wait for the nurse right now. And I told her, yeah, let's just wait for the nurse and I will ask her anything you say. And she said, okay. And then when the nurse came back, I already had an idea of what she was going to say, so it was a little easier because I already had all the background information. And that was that. Sometimes the patients and the providers as well. But the patients in this case, because the provider left and I was left alone with the patients, sometimes they don't know how this works, so you will have to remind them of how it works. And don't accept to do anything that you know will end badly for you. For example, if I would have accepted to write down all of the notes and then when the nurse came back, if I would have left anything out or if I would have said something wrong, then that would have been on me. That would have been my responsibility because I accepted to actually take down the notes and then just wait, I don't know how long, 5, 10 minutes before the nurse came back and then just give her what I remember. And that is something that you shouldn't do because remember, we're here to provide communication, the best communication between the parties. And I mean, unless you have a freakishly really, really good memory, you're not going to remember most of what is said. Like, for example, whenever I do one session to the next, I might not even remember the whole conversation I had in a session. So, if you are ever asked to do something, what I suggest you do is to, well, not do something, but actually uh, write down something and then say it back later, like after some time. What I would suggest is that you politely decline and you inform the situation. You let the party know that you cannot do that because it would be a disservice, because you're not going to remember everything and you are there to provide the best communication for both parties. And if you do what they're asking, you're not going to look good because you're going to do a bad job because you're not going to be able to remember all of that. And just remind the patients and providers or anyone of your job and what you actually do and what you are actually qualified to do, and it will make your life a whole lot easier. And for the last thing I would like to talk about today, it's a very tough session that I had today. Tough in every sense, and I'm going to let you know why. It was a tough session because the provider had to inform the other party that the patient who was in a coma had a very low probability of waking up. The doctor explained the situation and told them that the patient would not be waking up. So there, there were people in the hospital right there with the doctor that I had to interpret to over the video session, and then we had to call a third person, which it was just over the phone interpretation. And I mean, it was a tough call. It was a tough call because I mean I'm not a cold-hearted person. I have feelings, and as soon as I knew where this call was headed, I started to feel very sad for the family because I could see the two guys that were there in the room, and I could see how they were rubbing their eyes and how they just didn't want to look directly at the camera. And I just did my best. Uh, I I I mean I felt sad, but I could interpret and I could interpret everything that I said. My voice never broke once, but I did feel like it would have probably broke because um, it was just bad. And as interpreters, we're gonna come across these situations, and we have to find out how we're going to manage them. And like I said before, we always have to make it a priority to keep the communication going between both parties because that is our job, right? And I'm pretty sure that many of us don't probably like this calls. I know I don't like this calls, but even though I don't like taking this type of sessions, it's my job and it's my duty, and I actually do it, and I just try my best. And like I said, I felt bad during this session, but I actually helped to keep the communication between both parties going, and that is actually what made me feel good because I knew that I was interpreting some very important and very sensitive information that needed to be relayed. And they say that you must remain neutral for these sessions, and I do for the most part, or I don't show my emotion. But I mean, we're human, and if you do happen to show your emotion, if some tears come out, if you feel sad, if you are crying, I mean, it's okay. It's okay if you can't continue with the session. And if this ever happens to you, what I would suggest is that if you can, you excuse yourself from the session just a little bit until you can catch your bearings and go back to work. And if you can't, then I would suggest like you excuse yourself from the session and transfer it to somebody else, explain the situation if you can. And if you're in person, I don't know, I would say that the best thing that you can actually do It's just to excuse yourself a little bit and actually get your bearings. Try to relax. Try to get back into interpreter mode, and if you can, continue with the session. And if it's not possible, then it's okay. I mean, this can happen to anyone, right? So if you show your emotion, it's okay, and if you don't show your emotion, then that's even much better because you're going to be able to handle all of this tough calls like nothing, and it'll be easier. Uh, Having said that, I would say that we need to focus on our job and just focus on the communication part of the session and not on the situation that is happening. I know that this can sound pretty cold hearted, but we're doing a job, and our job is actually to deliver the communication between both parties. And we're not there to show our emotions or feel sad. Um, I know it's hard and it's difficult for some of us to actually do this. And I mean, you just have to do your best. You just have to do your best among these situations. And just remember that you're there to communicate and nothing else. And hopefully that will make it a little bit easier to actually get through these tough sessions. And to add to this session, once the lady on the phone started crying, I really couldn't hear anything that the doctor said. So whenever the lady was just sobbing really hard and the doctor was speaking, I would automatically just uh, say to the doctor, "Doctor, I'm very sorry, but I am not able to hear you at this moment." If we and then the doctor, of course, she would understand, and she would wait for the lady's crying to settle down a little bit, and then she would actually try again. And at some point, when I was delivering the messages, of course, I was sad and I could feel the knot in my throat. But like I said before, I was able to deliver everything clearly and to the best of my ability. And I would just let the doctor know when the patient was sobbing. I would just let the doctor know that I couldn't hear her. And then once the lady stopped sobbing and the doctor could actually say whatever she was trying to say, and the patient would just sob here and there, and there were things that I would miss. Instead of asking for a repetition from the doctor, what I actually opted in doing was to clarify with the doctor. For example, if the doctor said a phrase that I kind of understood, but it wasn't very clear, but I thought that's what the doctor said, then I would actually ask the doctor, I am very sorry, doctor. I was not able to hear the whole part. Can you please clarify if this is what you said? And then the doctor would say, yes, that's exactly what he said. And then I would say it to the other party. And sometimes the doctor would say, no, what I actually said was this. And then I would, but she would only correct the parts that were wrong. So I already knew that everything else was correct, and that way I didn't risk uh, that I couldn't hear the doctor again because the patient was sobbing, and the doctor could always hear me clearly. It was me that couldn't hear the doctor because I was the one that made the call for the other party. So I believe that was the correct way of handling that situation. That way I didn't have the doctor repeating so many times, and she would just tell me if I was correct in my interpretation or not. And like I said, I mean, this was a very tough session, not just because I couldn't hear the doctor, but because of the situation that was going on, and I couldn't detach myself from the situation. Of course, it didn't break me or anything, and I was able to handle the session, but it was still a tough call. It was still a tough session, but I believe I managed it correctly. And this reminded me of a session that I had before. It was actually a parent whose boy had passed away from a rare disease, and on that day, I had to be the bearer of bad news, and I had to let him know that his other child who was in the hospital also had the same disease, and it was most likely that he was going to pass away from that. And during this session, for me personally, any session that has to do with kids, like with kids crying, having a bad time, or having really bad diseases or things like that, and in this case, a kid that was going to pass away from a disease, and the parent that his child already passed away from one of these from that same disease. I mean, that just overwhelmed me, and I can still remember. I guess I'm feeling a little sad just remembering that, and I remember that uh, my voice is break during that session. I didn't cry though, but uh, I there were some words that I just couldn't keep straight because of how sad the situation made me feel. But I actually got through it, and I believe that is like the worst session that I've ever had, like the worst that I've ever felt in a session. That's why I tell you, I mean, we're human, and of course, the notebooks and everyone says that you shouldn't show your emotion, but I've experienced it, and I know that it's impossible to actually not show emotion sometimes. And it's okay to show emotion as long as you get through the session. And it's also okay to show your emotion and not be able to get to a session, but you have to keep your emotions in check, and you are going to have to work hard towards doing that if you actually um, want to keep on interpreting for these sessions, because you never know when one of these sessions is going to come along and break you. And I hope it never happens to you. And I hope that you have all cheerful sessions, but let's be honest, let's be real, that's not going to be the case. And sometimes we're just going to come across these situations, and it is up to you to decide what to do. And I hope that you have the wisdom to actually handle it in the best way, and that you actually do good. One last thing that I would like to add, I don't really know if it will get easier the more you interpret this type of sessions, and I really hope that you don't interpret as many sessions of this type, because I mean, it's tough. I think if I had to interpret all sessions where I had to be the bearer of bad news, I would have probably quit a long time ago, because I probably couldn't have handled it. Having said that, on the whole 4 years that I've been an interpreter, I think this is like my fourth session that I've actually had to be the bearer of bad news, and um, just present a really sad situation to another party. Um, but I know that as an interpreter, this is my job, this is what I signed up for, and I am going to take every one of those sessions, and I am going to make sure that all of the parties are communicating correctly. And I believe that that is the mindset that you have to have during any of these sessions. You just have to know that this is your job, that you can do it, and you can handle anything, and that you actually will do it. So that is going to be pretty much it for me today. I hope I was able to help you learn something with my highlights today. So that will be pretty much it for me today. Please leave your questions on the comments, and I will answer some of them on the next session. Remember that I'll be here every Monday through Friday, right after work, sharing the highlights of my workday with you. If I happen to not work a day, I will let you know. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video and have not done so for more content. And don't forget to share. Happy interpreting. Goodbye.